Welcome back into Salt Plus Systems, the podcast where we talk about what happens after impact. This isn't a show about pretending that life was ever easy. It's about rebuilding when life has knocked you down, when trauma has changed you, and when the old version of yourself can no longer carry you forward. Today's guest is a licensed therapist and founder of Revitalize Mental Health. He works with men, first responders, healthcare workers, military personnel, and individuals navigating trauma, grief, loss, survivor's guilt, and emotional recovery. We're going to talk about trauma, healing identity, and what it really takes to reclaim your life after difficult experiences. Please help me welcome in Daniel. For someone meeting you for the first time, who are you and what led you into this work?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jennifer. Appreciate it. That's a big question, and a lot of questions will come into it as well. But ultimately, was a traumatic brain injury from an auto accident in July 2009. So that was the slow but fast guide into becoming a licensed clinical social worker. And then my sister is also a social worker up in Wisconsin. So she was like, hey, check this out. And then I did and fell in love with it. So ultimately decided that a bachelor's in social work wasn't enough. So went on to get my master's.
Yeah, that definitely would definitely change your direction in life, having something like that happen to you. Now, you normally your practice focuses heavily on men.
Yeah.
Why do you think that so many men struggle to ask for help before things reach a breaking point?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of norms around just masculinity in our country. I would say more so there's the piece of not asking for help, but there's also the piece of I can just handle this. I've handled a lot of other stuff, and to some degree that works, and to some degree it's leading to just emotional numbness, suppression of emotions, disconnect or mind body disconnect. And then what we see are these ripple effects going out into interpersonal relationships, even with your children or the people that you love or the people that are close to you, productivity issues, difficulties with concentration. So these ripple effects just start stemming out, and it's very difficult to ignore some of those pieces when, even though you're doing a great job of ignoring the trauma, but you're not doing a great job managing all these other pieces that seem to be crumbling. And so to answer your question, it's the norms in our country, but it's more so just this idea that a lot of people value autonomy, they value independence. And if you ask for help, you're counter that independence, right? You're more in an interdependent phase at that point. And our society is heavily interdependent, not just independent.
Yeah, people can only compartmentalize for so long before it starts to bleed into your nervous system.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed on your website is the focus on trauma. And when people hear the word trauma, they often think of major catastrophic events. How do you define trauma?
Yeah. So I'm going to put that back on the client to say whatever heavily stressful situation or overwhelming experience that they're self identifying as trauma. But trauma is a very big umbrella, right? It could be almost clipping somebody on the highway, and your body has that surge of adrenaline, that surge of trembling and heart rate, and maybe you're sweating, right? It could also be responding to a 911 emergency, and you never know what's going to be there or what you might see. Could be observing things. Trauma and PTSD is underneath that umbrella, right? But for PTSD, your well-being or the well-being of somebody else, or witnessing something vicariously, like a first responder coming up on an auto accident, right? Where there's horrific injury or loss of life. So those are more, and then sexual abuse are more of those PTSD criteria, but trauma could be chronic bullying in high school, right? Or college, harassment in the workplace, right? All those pieces can impact just our stress response and leave those marks on the nervous system, like you mentioned, Jennifer.
Yeah, so I have PTSD, so I can definitely relate to a lot of what you're saying. And those impacts, they can last for years.
Mm.
What impacts are you seeing that a lot of men are carrying through year after year?
Oh, year after year. So first responder military kind of genre or occupations, there's a lot of vicarious trauma, survivor's guilt, moral injury that just kind of pervade, especially for military personnel that have been in combat situations. But survivor's guilt can also be, hey, we were driving with a few friends and two people died or one person died, but we survived, right? That can lead to some survivor's guilt as well. So those pieces, a lot of the childhood trauma, people are, or men specifically, oh, it wasn't that bad, but it was like you didn't know where your next meal was going to come from, or when it was going to come, or who you could trust, right? So there's these pieces of attachment, there's these pieces of relational trauma that are very prevalent, and then 20, 30 years later you're bringing that into your committed relationships, you're bringing that into relationships with your nieces, your nephews, your children, whatever it might be, and that difficulty to trust yourself, right, to set a boundary, or to also allow a boundary some flex, right? Because sometimes we can be too, our boundaries can be too rigid, and then it's like it's very hard to maintain human contact.
Yeah, speaking from my own personal experience, I can definitely relate to that, having childhood trauma and just navigating those lessons, I guess, if you will, and realizing what my nervous system was and realizing that unresolved trauma can definitely impact relationships in different areas of my life. And I found that through healing and being able to love and care for myself and to find those resolved moments where I do think that maybe I'm too strong. Everybody leans on me to be strong, it seems like in life. And I've been through more than I should have endured. But with those things, I found that through my own personal strength and perseverance that I've come to realize that things like nervous system resets and actually just being able to speak with people like yourself have helped substantially. Now, a lot of people that are listening, they may not even realize that they're carrying this unresolved trauma. Like you said, they're functioning day to day. What are some of the warning signs that someone may need help, even if they think they're functioning okay?
Yeah. So to make a blanket statement, everyone's going to be different, right? Some people will find themselves in almost behavioral or habitual behavioral patterns where the cycle starts, and it could be a relationship, for example, and then in 6 months it's over, right? It crumbles, it falls apart. And that's been going on for 4, 5, 6 years, right? Other habitual behavioral patterns could be surrounding addiction, excuse me, addictive tendencies. So relationships can be addictive as well, but not just substance use or alcohol use, but porn, problematic porn use, right? Where it's interfering with your relationships or your productivity at work or just meeting your daily needs. Gambling can be another big one. But looking for those times where you want to do something, but something pulls you away, right? You want to make positive changes, but something pulls you back in. So impulsivity, emotional outbursts could be another sign, or very much reactivity versus responsivity. So if we live in the more reactive part, that could be signs of nervous system dysregulation. So trauma responses, it could be a lot of stuff.
Very interesting. Yeah, there's different layers, it seems like, to the trauma and how it really affects you on the day to day. One thing I hear often through my guests is that people saying that this should be over by now. I should have resolved it. I'm in my mid 40s.
Mhm.
I'm this amount of years old on like on this earth, right? They think they should have resolved it. And why doesn't healing always follow the timeline that we give ourselves and that expectation?
Yeah. So sometimes things are, depending on the type of trauma, depending on what you experience, especially childhood trauma, sometimes, and that's 40 to 60% of the therapeutic outcome in a therapy session or therapeutic timeline for somebody to heal is dependent on the interpersonal dynamic between the therapist and the client. And a lot of trauma, especially childhood, is relational and attachment based, right? And it's hard to heal from that when you don't have somebody in your corner that being that secure attachment, right? So if you're trying to do it on your own, it's very hard to fabricate that.
Yeah, that's understandable. I can definitely look back on my life from when I was young and having grown up with a lot of trauma and PTSD and stuff like that. So, and so the older I've gotten, the more I've had to learn not to be reactive, how to be responsible with the way that I react to things, and that not everything needs a reaction. For me, that was one of the biggest takeaways that I've had to learn, sometimes even the hard way.
Yeah.
On your site, you talk about helping people reconnect with their identity after trauma. How does trauma change the way that people do see themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. So not only trauma, but the ripple effects, right? The self-destructiveness, the self-sabotaging, the interpersonal fallout really dampens or eradicates your sense of self, your self-esteem, your ability to confidently navigate this world in terms of not something that's objectively measured, right? Sometimes people who have trauma, they also are very much into control, very much into perfectionism because it's outwardly, right? But inwardly, there's not a lot. So working on reconnecting with some of those pieces that are still in, so pulling for, it's called IFS or parts work, ego states, right? There's some of those parts are in there, the childhood part, the wounded part, or the survivor part, but they've been so suppressed throughout the years that if we just give them time and space to show up in therapy, maybe they show up and it's very difficult. So we work with some of the difficult parts that show up with them, but more so allowing them some bandwidth to say, hey, I'm still here. Even though I might be hurt or I was harmed and I survived, there's resilience in those parts, right? There's grit, which is a huge quality that people need because this world is tumultuous and it's horrific and it's unpredictable.
Yeah, I
And
know all about grit and resilience. That's a fact. So if it wasn't for grit and resilience and picking the pieces up every single day and just saying, you know what, dust myself off, you deserve better. Let's go.
nobody's going to do it for you. That's the other part too, right? Even though trauma might have been perpetuated by somebody else, nobody is going to say, hey, go do this, or maybe a partner or something like that, or a loved one in your life, but nobody's actually going to go to the sessions for you and do the work.
Yeah, you got to do the work yourself. You got to show up
Yeah.
for yourself. Those are all facts. I am a huge advocate of those things because people see the show, they see the clips, they see everything, but they don't understand the daily discipline that it actually takes to run YouTube and everything that I do. So you can 100% relate to showing up for yourself and doing the work for yourself. It's no one else's responsibility but your own. I agree with you. What does healing actually look like? Not the social media version, not the Instagram version where everybody looks pretty and handsome and everybody has their lives together, but the actual real version that you see in your office.
Yeah. And again, so blanket statement, it's going to look a little different for everyone, but a lot of people that I work with and men, they're used to humming at a pretty high frequency during the day and even at night because they're not able to let down, they're not able to sleep, or they're restless, they're hypervigilant, whatever it might be. And the subtle piece is, what is it like to actually have peace in your body or stillness in your body versus this high frequency hum?
Again, I can completely relate to that. You speak about hypervigilance and having that hum in your body and thinking that chaos and noise are around the corner everywhere you go. I lived my life like that for a very long time. I learned to read patterns early as a kid. I learned to read rooms, read expressions, read the room, if you will, and carried that throughout most of my life. I think that the biggest thing for me to actually find that reset and that peace was just being able to let it go. I have this people, this is really exposing, but I have a tougher exterior. It's really for me to be able to share parts of myself, like being in foster care, and things that I am openly stating on my podcast now are 100% things that I would have never indulged public
Mm.
before. And so I find that when I can drop my armor and
Yeah.
I can allow the wounded warrior to come through
Yeah.
and actually look at myself in the mirror and realize, yeah, I've been through some shit, but I know at the end of the day that I am worth it. And I think
Mhm.
that's the biggest takeaway for me, to be able to realize that my nervous system has earned it to stand down and to be able to rest peacefully.
Yeah. Yeah. There,
For somebody listening right now who feels stuck, they feel overwhelmed, they might feel angry, they might feel disconnected or emotionally exhausted. What's one thing that they can begin doing today?
um, so one actionable step would be finding those activities or moments that give you moments of pause or moments of stillness. So, like, we're in Wisconsin, we live 10 minutes away from Lake Michigan, right? So for me, it's bodies of water in nature, right? For you, for some listeners, it might be the Rocky Mountains, right? I don't know what it's going to be for each of you listening, but there's all those pieces, even in times of trauma or chronic traumatization. There's maybe, even if it's a fraction of a second, some sort of piece, right? If it's a sunrise or a sunset or whatever it might be, right? A delicious meal, the smell of something
Maybe
that's
listening to their favorite podcast.
there you go, right? Or listening to other people's healing journeys, or maybe getting lost in a
Absolutely.
book, right? Whatever it might be. So to find those, and when you're noticing that hum, to go to those, right? And the other thing that I'm a really big advocate for is obviously trauma therapy. I've found that somatic experiencing therapy is incredible for helping to heal trauma and complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and also eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy is a very helpful psychotherapy to heal. I'm gravitating more towards somatic work, but I still have people who I do EMDR with.
That's amazing work. I'm so grateful and honored to have you on my show. If you could leave our audience with one message about resilience, healing, and rebuilding their lives, what would that be?
Yeah, there was something you said a few moments ago, the something about like the wounded warrior, like if I allow that wounded warrior to come in. And so two things. One, there's a big difference between wounded and out of the race, right? If you're out of the race, there's no possibility for growth, right? If you're wounded, you can heal, right? Two is that with trauma therapy, so for a lot of like men that I work with, they're like, I can't let down because I have so and so to protect. I can't. I have to be on guard, right? I need to be able to go 0 to 60, especially if I'm a first responder. And absolutely, right? But the thing that trauma does is it ramps up the nervous system and it takes away flexibility in the nervous system. So with trauma therapy, what we're doing is we're bringing fluidity back, right? So that you can be let down when you're with those that you love, but you can also go up when you're at work, right? And come back down. And so we're not taking away your ability to go on or to get it, right? We're just bringing in the fluidity so that you have the ability to let down.
Yeah, that's amazing that you do amazing work. And before we wrap up, where can people learn more about you? Where can they follow your work and connect with you if they'd like to reach out to you directly?
Yeah, so I'm licensed in Wisconsin as well as in Colorado. And if you would like to work with me, you'd have to technically live in one of those states, just based off of licensure requirements. But otherwise, you can check out a lot of stuff on my website, revitalizementalhealth.com. There's some Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, stuff like that too, that you can check out.
Okay, perfect. I will be sure to put your links in the description below. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your experience and your insight. And to everybody listening, remember this: Your story is not a life sentence. The things that you have survived may have shaped you, but they do not define your future. If today's conversation resonated with you, make sure you subscribe, share this episode with somebody who needs it, and check out the links below to connect with our guest. Until next time, keep building systems that support the life that you're trying to create, and we'll see you in the next episode.